My name is Nina Foster. I'm 42 years old, and last Saturday night, my ex-husband stood in front of 30 people at an engagement party and introduced his new girlfriend as the upgrade. His arm was draped around her shoulders, his smile wide and confident. She looked uncomfortable, glancing at me with what might have been pity or embarrassment. I wasn't sure which. "This is Kelsey," he said, voice carrying across the room. "My upgrade." A few people laughed nervously. Others looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. I stood there holding my wine glass, face neutral, while my ex-husband publicly declared I was inferior to the 29-year-old blonde beside him. I didn't argue, didn't correct him, didn't mention the business I'd built from nothing or the 8-figure net worth I'd accumulated since our divorce. I just watched Kelsey's face, watched her brow furrow slightly, watched her study me with curious eyes instead of laughing along with his joke. And I waited. Because I'd learned something important over the years. Success doesn't need witnesses. It just needs time. And Ryan had just started a timer he didn't even know was counting down. The engagement party was for mutual friends, people Ryan and I had known during our marriage. I'd almost declined the invitation, not wanting the awkwardness of seeing him with someone new. But our friends had insisted, promising it would be fine, that everyone was adults here. They'd lied. The moment I walked into the backyard garden, strung with fairy lights and filled with champagne-sipping guests, I felt Ryan's eyes on me. He was standing near the bar with a woman I didn't recognize, whispering something that made her giggle. I greeted the hosts, congratulated them, and tried to blend into conversations with other guests. For 20 minutes, I successfully avoided Ryan. Then he found me. "Nina," he said, approaching with that familiar smirk. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly. He gestured to the woman beside him. She was pretty in an obvious way. Long blonde hair, tight dress, practiced smile. "This is Kelsey. My upgrade." The words hung in the air like a slap. Around us, conversations stuttered. Someone coughed. Another person suddenly became very interested in their phone. Kelsey's face flushed. "Ryan, that's just a joke," he said quickly, squeezing her shoulder. But his eyes stayed on me, measuring my reaction. I gave him nothing. Just a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Kelsey." She mumbled something back, clearly mortified. Ryan looked disappointed that I hadn't reacted more strongly. The humiliation should have stung more than it did. 3 years ago, when we were first divorced, it would have destroyed me. I would have gone home and cried, replayed his words over and over, wondered what was wrong with me. But I wasn't that person anymore. Still, standing there while people pretended they hadn't heard him call me inferior, that burned. Not because I believed him, but because he tried to diminish me publicly to make himself feel bigger. Kelsey apologized awkwardly once Ryan walked away to refill his drink. "I'm sorry about that. He didn't tell me he was going to say that." "It's fine," I said, and I meant it. "It's not fine. It was rude." She twisted her champagne glass nervously. "He talks about you sometimes. Says you two just grew apart." "Is that what he says?" She nodded. "That you wanted different things. That he needed someone more ambitious." I took a sip of wine to hide my expression. More ambitious. That was rich coming from Ryan, who'd spent our entire marriage coasting on mediocre performance at his sales job while I worked 80-hour weeks building my consulting business. "People remember things differently," I said diplomatically. Kelsey studied my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "What do you do for work?" Before I could answer, Ryan returned, sliding his arm around Kelsey's waist. "Nina? She does consulting or something." Nothing impressive. Kelsey's eyes stayed on me, waiting for confirmation or correction. I just smiled. Something like that. Ryan had always been good at rewriting history. During our marriage, he'd convinced me that my career success was just luck. That my business only worked because I'd gotten a few lucky breaks. That real success, his kind, required charisma and natural talent, things I supposedly lacked. I believed him for too long. Now, at the party, he was retelling our breakup story to a small group that had gathered. Kelsey stood beside him listening. I was nearby, pretending to admire the garden flowers while I eavesdropped. "We were just on different paths," Ryan said, voice filled with practiced sincerity. "I was ready to take risks, Build something big. Nina wanted to play it safe, stay small. No judgment. Some people are just built differently. A few people nodded sympathetically. One woman actually patted his arm. It was hard, he continued, watching someone I loved refuse to dream bigger. But eventually I had to choose my own growth. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Ryan had never taken a professional risk in his life. Every opportunity he'd pursued had been handed to him by someone else. Meanwhile, I'd built my consulting firm from scratch, signing my first client while working full-time, spending nights and weekends developing proposals, risking everything. But I'd never corrected his narrative. Never publicly disputed his version of events. Because the truth was, I didn't need anyone to know my story. I just needed to live it. That silence, though, it was about to cost him more than he could imagine. People often asked why I stayed quiet about my success. Why I didn't correct Ryan's lies, didn't defend myself, didn't set the record straight. The answer was simple. I didn't need to. Success doesn't require witnesses. It doesn't need validation or public recognition. It just needs to exist. I learned that lesson the hard way. Early in my career, I tried to make people see my accomplishments. I'd talked about my wins, shared my achievements, sought approval. It had backfired. People, especially people like Ryan, saw my success as threatening. They minimized it, explained it away, found reasons why it didn't count. So I'd stopped talking, started working, let my bank account speak for itself. By the time Ryan and I divorced, my business was pulling in 7 figures annually. I owned my house outright, had investments that generated passive income, was financially secure in ways Ryan couldn't comprehend. He had no idea. During our marriage, I'd kept my finances separate, maintained my own accounts, never disclosed exact numbers. When we split, he'd assumed I'd struggle, that I'd need his support, his money, his help. He'd been so wrong. And now, 3 years later, watching him parade his upgrade around, I realized my silence had created a gap between his perception and reality so wide, it was about to swallow him whole. I just had to wait for the right moment. Kelsey found me again later in the evening. I was standing alone near the dessert table, sampling a tiny chocolate tart. "So what kind of consulting do you do?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Before I could respond, Ryan appeared from nowhere. "Business consulting. Small businesses, local stuff. Nothing you'd have heard of." He said it dismissively, like my work was a hobby, like I was playing entrepreneur while real professionals did important work. Kelsey frowned slightly. "That sounds interesting, though. What kind of businesses?" "Tech startups, mostly," I said. "I help them scale operations, optimize workflows, prepare for acquisition." Ryan laughed. "She makes it sound more impressive than it is. Trust me, it's pretty basic stuff." Something flickered across Kelsey's face. Doubt, maybe, or confusion. She looked at me more carefully now, taking in my tailored dress, my understated jewelry, the confidence I carried despite Ryan's attempts to diminish me. "How long have you been doing it?" she asked. 14 years. "Wow, it's a niche market," Ryan interrupted. "Limited growth potential. I keep telling her she should pivot to something with real scalability, but..." He shrugged, as if my stubbornness was both amusing and disappointing. Kelsey didn't look convinced. Her eyes stayed on me, questions forming behind them. I excused myself politely, leaving them at the dessert table. As I walked away, I felt Kelsey's gaze following me. She was starting to wonder, starting to notice the gaps in Ryan's story. Good. I left the party early, claiming a headache. As I drove home, I thought about Kelsey's expression, the way she'd studied me, the questions she'd tried to ask before Ryan interrupted. I wondered if she'd do what most people did these days when they met someone new. I wondered if she'd Google me. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and poured myself a real glass of wine, not the tiny sips I'd taken at the party while maintaining composure. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Jasmine, who'd also been at the party. "Ryan's an asshole. Are you okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine." Honestly, that upgrade comment was so out of line. "He's always been insecure," I replied. "This isn't new." Kelsey seemed uncomfortable. She should be. She's dating a man who builds himself up by tearing down his ex. Jasmine sent back a string of supportive emojis, then, for what it's worth, you looked amazing tonight. Confident. Successful. Everything he pretended you weren't. I smiled at that. Set my phone down. Finished my wine. And somewhere across town, I imagined Kelsey lying in bed, unable to sleep, picking up her phone and typing my name into a search bar. The search results would load. Articles would appear. Numbers would materialize. And everything Ryan had told her would start to crumble. I didn't have to imagine for long. The next morning, I woke to a notification on LinkedIn. Kelsey Morrison had viewed my profile. I smiled into my coffee. My LinkedIn was professional but thorough. CEO and founder of Foster Strategic Consulting. Featured speaker at 3 major tech conferences. Board member for 2 nonprofit organizations. Advisor to multiple startup accelerators. The profile didn't list my net worth, of course. But it painted a picture very different from the one Ryan had drawn. The struggling small business consultant doing basic stuff with limited growth potential. I wondered what else she'd found. Probably the Forbes article from 2 years ago, Top Women Entrepreneurs Under 45. Or the TechCrunch feature about my firm's role in helping 3 startups achieve successful acquisitions. Maybe she'd found the podcast interview where I discussed scaling from solo consultant to a team of 12, from $100,000 in annual revenue to over $8 million. Or the local business journal piece that mentioned I'd recently purchased a second property, a small office building downtown. Each article, each mention, each accomplishment would contradict everything Ryan had told her. I finished my coffee and checked my phone again. Another LinkedIn notification. Kelsey had now viewed my company's page. She was doing deep research. Good for her. The company page listed our major clients, recognizable tech names, well-funded startups, established corporations seeking digital transformation. Nothing basic about it. I wondered when she'd confront Ryan. How she'd bring it up. Whether she'd be direct or subtle. What Kelsey was discovering, I imagined, was a math problem that didn't add up. Ryan had told her I played it safe. Did local consulting. Nothing impressive. But the numbers told a different story. My firm's client list included companies that had raised tens of millions in venture capital. The speaking engagements were at conferences that cost thousands to attend. The board positions were with organizations that required serious professional credibility. None of that was small or basic. And if she was smart, which I suspected she was, she'd start comparing my success to Ryan's. Ryan worked in medical device sales. Made decent money, around $120,000 a year. Enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. He drove a leased BMW he couldn't really afford. Lived in a nice apartment but complained constantly about rent. Talked big about investments but actually had very little saved. I knew this because mutual friends had mentioned it. Because Ryan himself had accidentally revealed it during a tense conversation about divorce finances 3 years ago. He'd built an image of success while actually treading water financially. Meanwhile, I'd built actual success while maintaining a low profile. The contrast would be obvious to anyone who looked closely. And Kelsey was looking very, very closely. I pulled up my own company's website, trying to see it through her eyes. Professional. Polished. Established. The About page included a photo of me speaking at a conference, microphone in hand, confidence radiating. Nothing about that image suggested limited growth potential. I closed the laptop and smiled. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Jasmine texted me Monday afternoon. Just heard from Katie that Kelsey was asking Ryan about your business at brunch yesterday. He apparently got defensive. I wasn't surprised. Ryan hated being questioned, especially when the questions revealed gaps in his narrative. What did she ask? I typed back. Why he never mentioned you ran a successful consulting firm. Why he called your work basic when you've clearly built something substantial. And he laughed it off. Said you're good at self-promotion, but the reality is less impressive than it looks online. I shook my head. Classic Ryan. When confronted with facts that contradicted his story, he doubled down. Dismissed the evidence. Attacked the credibility. Did Kelsey buy it? I asked. Katie says no. She looked skeptical. That night, I got a friend request on Instagram from Kelsey. I accepted, curious what she'd find there. My Instagram was personal but not private. Photos of travel, hiking trips, beach vacations, a recent weekend in Paris. Pictures from charity events. Candid shots with friends. Nothing flashy. Nothing screaming wealth. But nothing suggesting struggle either. In contrast, Ryan's Instagram was all performance. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, carefully staged shots that screamed, "Look how successful I am." The difference in authenticity would be obvious. 2 hours after accepting her request, I saw that Kelsey had liked several photos, including one from a business award ceremony where I'd received recognition for fastest growing consulting firm. She was piecing it together, building a picture that conflicted dramatically with what Ryan had told her. And soon she'd have to decide who to believe. Ryan called me Tuesday night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Nina," he said without preamble, "why are you trying to make me look bad?" "Excuse me." Kelsey's been asking questions. About your business, your success, all this stuff that makes it seem like I lied to her. I sat down, genuinely amazed. "Ryan, I haven't talked to Kelsey since the party. Whatever she's learned, she found on her own. You know what I mean. Your LinkedIn, all those articles, it's like you're trying to prove something." "My LinkedIn exists because I run a business. The articles exist because journalists write about successful companies. None of that has anything to do with you." "She thinks I lied about you." "Did you?" Silence. "Then I just simplified things. I didn't think she needed to know every detail. You called my work nothing impressive and said I had limited growth potential. That's not simplifying, Ryan. That's lying. You're twisting my words. I'm literally quoting you." He exhaled sharply. "Look, can you just tone it down? Stop posting about work stuff? It's making things complicated." I almost laughed. "You want me to hide my professional accomplishments because they make you uncomfortable? I want you to stop trying to compete with me." "I'm not competing with you, Ryan. I never was. You're the one who introduced me as your downgrade at a party." I said, "Upgrade," about Kelsey. It wasn't about you. Calling her an upgrade literally implies I'm a downgrade. That's how comparisons work. Another long silence. Then, quietly, "Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" I hung up. The next time Kelsey Googled me, and I was certain there would be a next time, she'd find even more. My company had just been featured in a major industry publication discussing our expansion plans. The article mentioned our growing team, our new office space, and our projected revenue growth. It included a quote from me, "We're not trying to be the biggest consulting firm. We're trying to be the best." That means selective client partnerships and a focus on measurable impact. The article also mentioned that we'd turned down several acquisition offers, choosing to remain independent and maintain our company culture. These weren't the actions of someone playing it safe or thinking small. These were strategic decisions made by someone who knew exactly what they were building and why. I wondered if Kelsey would find the university lecture I'd given last semester, Scaling Without Selling Out, Building Sustainable Business Growth. The video had been posted online, had gotten decent views. In it, I talked about the pressure to grow too fast, to chase funding, to prioritize size over quality. I discussed the importance of building wealth slowly and protecting your vision. Ryan had mocked that lecture when he'd heard about it, called it small-minded thinking, said real entrepreneurs took big swings. But my small-minded thinking had built a multi-million-dollar company with zero debt and complete autonomy. His big swings had resulted in him still renting an apartment at 44 and driving a leased car. The math really didn't add up. And Kelsey was smart enough to see it. By Thursday, I heard through mutual friends that Kelsey had started asking other people about me. Casual questions at first. How long has Nina had her business? And is she actually successful or just good at marketing? The responses apparently surprised her. One friend told her I'd helped their startup get acquired for $15 million. Another mentioned I'd spoken at South by Southwest. Someone else brought up my charity work, funding scholarships for women entering tech fields. Each conversation added another layer to a picture that contradicted everything Ryan had said. That weekend, I ran into them at a coffee shop. Pure coincidence. I was meeting a client. They were having breakfast. Ryan saw me first. His expression tightened. Kelsey followed his gaze, then waved slightly. I waved back and headed to my table in the back corner. Tried to focus on my client meeting, reviewing their quarterly projections and discussing expansion strategies. But I noticed Kelsey watching me, watching how I interacted with my client. Professional, confident, knowledgeable. Watching my client's respect and attention. When my meeting ended, Kelsey was waiting near the exit. Ryan was still at their table on his phone. "Nina," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't you correct him? At the party, when he said your work wasn't impressive. Why didn't you say something?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because I don't need him to validate my success. It exists whether he acknowledges it or not." She nodded slowly. "He's been telling me you're difficult. That you can't handle him being happy. And what do you think?" "I think he's scared of you." That observation, "he's scared of you," rattled something loose in Ryan's carefully constructed facade. The following week, Kelsey started asking more direct questions. I heard about it from Jasmine, who heard from Katie, who'd been at dinner with them. She straight up asked him why he felt the need to diminish you, Jasmine reported. In front of everyone. What did he say? That your success was overblown. That those articles were exaggerated. That you paid for some of that publicity. I actually laughed at that. Every article about my company had been earned through actual accomplishments. I'd never paid for coverage. Never hired a PR firm to plant stories. How did Kelsey react? She asked for specifics. Which articles were exaggerated? Who did you supposedly pay? He couldn't answer. Just got angry and said she was taking your side. The relationship was deteriorating fast. And I hadn't done anything except exist successfully while Ryan tried to rewrite reality. That weekend, they came to another mutual friend's dinner party. I'd considered skipping, but I refused to hide anymore. The moment I walked in, I felt the tension. Ryan glared. Kelsey looked relieved to see me, which was interesting. During dinner, someone asked about my recent conference presentation. I answered briefly, downplaying the significance. Kelsey spoke up. I watched that presentation online. It was really impressive. The framework you developed for scaling operations, that's being used by companies now, right? Some have adopted it, yes. That's not just consulting. That's thought leadership. Ryan's fork clattered against his plate. Can we talk about something else? But the damage was done. Everyone at the table was now looking at me differently, reassessing, recalculating, realizing Ryan's version of events didn't match reality. The private confrontation happened that night. I didn't witness it, but Kelsey told me about it later. They'd gone back to Ryan's apartment after the dinner party. She'd been quiet during the drive, thinking. Finally, she'd asked, "Why did you lie about her?" Ryan had tried to deflect, to minimize, to redirect. But Kelsey pressed. "You called her unambitious. Said she played it small. But she's built something significant. Something you haven't." That's when Ryan had gotten honest. Or as honest as he could manage. Because she needed to feel smaller, he'd said. When we were married, she was always achieving something. Always growing. It made me feel stuck. "So you lied to make yourself feel better?" I didn't lie. I just interpreted things differently. Kelsey had stared at him. "You told me she was nothing. That I was an upgrade. But you weren't comparing her to me. You were trying to convince yourself you'd upgraded from someone who was actually out of your league." That observation, brutal and accurate, had triggered Ryan's defensive spiral. He'd accused Kelsey of being manipulated by me. Of falling for my image management. Of not understanding the real story. She'd asked what the real story was. He couldn't articulate one that made sense. That's when Kelsey realized the upgrade comment wasn't confidence. It was profound insecurity. Ryan needed to believe he'd leveled up because the alternative, that he'd never been on my level to begin with, was too threatening to his ego. She'd started seeing him differently after that. Started noticing the cracks in his performance. The shift in Kelsey's perception became public at the next social gathering, a birthday party for one of our mutual friends. I almost skipped it. These overlapping social circles were exhausting, but the birthday girl was someone I genuinely cared about, so I went. Ryan and Kelsey were already there when I arrived. They were standing apart, body language tense. During the evening, someone mentioned a business article they'd read. The conversation turned to entrepreneurship, and someone asked my opinion. I shared my thoughts briefly, talking about the balance between growth and sustainability, the importance of company culture, the value of patient capital. When I finished, Kelsey spoke up. Nina's company was just featured in Forbes, wasn't it? For your approach to scaling without external funding. Everyone turned to look at me. I nodded. A few months ago, yes. That's incredible, someone said. How many companies have you helped now? We've worked with about 70 clients over the years. 12 successful acquisitions, probably twice that many still operating independently. Ryan made a sound, half laugh, half scoff. She makes it sound more impressive than it is. It's really just basic business consulting dressed up with fancy language. The room went quiet. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Kelsey turned to Ryan, voice cold. Why do you do that? Do what? Minimize her accomplishments. You've been doing it all night. All week, actually. I'm just being realistic. You're being insecure. She looked around the room. Nina runs a multi-million-dollar company. She speaks at conferences. She's helped dozens of businesses succeed. And Ryan keeps trying to convince everyone, including himself, that it doesn't count. Ryan's face flushed red. Kelsey, this isn't. It's pathetic, she continued. And I'm done pretending I don't see it. The party dissolved into awkward silence after Kelsey's outburst. Ryan grabbed his coat and left without saying goodbye. Kelsey stayed, accepting a glass of wine from the host. I found her on the back patio later, staring at the city lights. I'm sorry, she said when she saw me. That was probably uncomfortable for you. It's fine. It's not. But I needed to say it. He's been lying to me since we met, and I'm tired of playing along. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she asked, why did you marry him? I thought about that. He wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it. I was younger, less confident. I believed him when he said my success was luck. But you don't believe that anymore. No. I built this. Every client, every contract, every expansion, that was strategy and hard work and smart decisions. Not luck. Kelsey nodded. He told me you'd never understand real ambition. That you were content with mediocrity. And now I see that he's the one settling. He had someone extraordinary and convinced himself she was ordinary so he wouldn't have to feel inferior. She turned to face me fully. I Googled your net worth. Well, estimates of it. The numbers I found. Is that accurate? I hesitated. Probably. I don't track it obsessively, but the estimates are in the right range. He has no idea, does he? No. She smiled sadly. He called me an upgrade. But he downgraded himself 3 years ago, and he still doesn't know it. I didn't correct her, but I thought I was never the prize in this comparison. I was just myself, and that was always enough. Kelsey broke up with Ryan that night. She told me later it was one of the easiest decisions she'd ever made. Once I saw the pattern, how he built himself up by tearing you down, I couldn't unsee it, she explained over coffee 2 weeks later. I kept wondering when he'd start doing it to me. He probably would have, I said honestly. That's how insecure people operate. They need someone to feel superior to. Were you waiting for me to figure it out? I considered that. Not waiting exactly. But I knew if you were smart, and you clearly are, you'd see through his stories eventually. The truth has a way of surfacing. He's been calling me, leaving angry voicemails about how you poisoned me against him. Did I? No. You barely spoke to me. I poisoned myself by Googling you and discovering he'd lied about everything. She took a sip of her latte. He's also been telling people you sabotaged his relationship. That you were jealous and couldn't stand seeing him happy. Are you surprised? No. It's predictable, actually. He can't admit he sabotaged it himself by being dishonest and insecure. Kelsey had started dating someone new, a software engineer she'd met through work. From her description, he sounded stable, honest, secure in himself. He asks about my work, she told me, smiling. Actual questions because he's actually interested. Not dismissive comments designed to make himself feel bigger. That's how it should be, I said. Before we parted, Kelsey thanked me. For not being petty. For not gloating. for just existing successfully and letting the truth speak for itself. I learned a long time ago that revenge isn't necessary when you have self-respect, I said. The people who try to diminish you are already diminished. You just have to wait for them to reveal it. Ryan's anger escalated over the following weeks. He called me twice, both times furious. The first call, "You turned Kelsey against me." I didn't. She made her own decisions based on the information she found. Information you made sure she'd find. Ryan, I didn't send her articles. I didn't contact her. She Googled me, something anyone can do, and discovered you'd been lying. That's on you. You could have downplayed your success. Instead, you flaunted it. I didn't flaunt anything. I just didn't hide. There's a difference. The second call came after someone at his office mentioned my company's latest expansion. Apparently, one of his colleagues had attended a presentation I'd given and brought it up at a team meeting. "You're making me look incompetent," Ryan said. "How?" "By doing my job. By constantly showing off your success everywhere I turn." "I'm not following you around, Ryan. We live in the same city, work in overlapping industries, have mutual friends. You're going to hear about my professional life sometimes. That's not me targeting you. It feels targeted. That's your insecurity talking. I'm just living my life." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Did you ever love me?" The question surprised me. "Yes. Once. Before you decided my success was a threat to your ego." "I never." "You did. Constantly. And when you couldn't diminish my accomplishments to my face anymore, you started doing it behind my back. To Kelsey, to mutual friends, to anyone who would listen. Because you never needed me," he said quietly. "You were always fine on your own. Being self-sufficient isn't the same as not needing someone. I needed you emotionally. But you were so focused on being needed financially, professionally, practically. You missed what I actually needed." I hung up before he could respond. I didn't hear from Ryan for a month after that. But I heard about him through the grapevine. He'd apparently told several people that our divorce had been the worst mistake of his life, that he'd realized too late what he'd given up. I didn't know if he meant it or if it was another performance. Ryan rewriting history again, this time casting himself as the regretful ex instead of the successful upgrade. It didn't matter either way. Then, one evening, he showed up at my office. My assistant called to say he was in the lobby, asking to see me. I almost said no, but curiosity won. He looked tired when he walked into my office. Less polished than usual. The confident swagger had dimmed. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. I gestured to a chair. "What do you want, Ryan?" "To apologize. For the upgrade comment. For everything I said to Kelsey about you. For the way I talked about your work." I waited. There was more coming. "I was intimidated," he admitted. "During our marriage, after the divorce at that party, I was always intimidated by what you'd built. By how you did it without needing anyone's approval or help. It made me feel small. So you tried to make me smaller." "Yes." At least he was being honest now. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Kelsey was right. I downgraded myself when I lost you. And I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself otherwise." I leaned back in my chair. "I appreciate the apology. But I need you to understand something. My success was never about you. It wasn't to spite you or compete with you or prove anything to you. I built this because I love the work, because I'm good at it, because it matters to me. I know that now. Do you? Because you've spent years creating narratives where everything I do is somehow connected to our relationship. But Ryan, I barely think about you anymore. You're not the center of my story. You're barely a footnote." That hurt him. I could see it in his face. But it was true. And he needed to hear it. Ryan left my office quietly. I didn't expect to see him again anytime soon. But 2 days later, Jasmine called with news. Ryan quit his job. What? Yeah. Gave 2 weeks' notice. Said he's moving to Phoenix to work for some startup his college friend founded. I processed that. Good for him, I guess. Jasmine says it's because he can't handle living in the same city as you anymore. Every business event, every mutual friend gathering, he's confronted with his own lies. Maybe that was true. Maybe Ryan needed geographic distance to rebuild his ego. Or maybe he was running away from the truth, that he'd never been the success story he'd pretended to be. Either way, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. Just a quiet relief that I'd never have to attend another party and watch him perform his carefully constructed persona. The following week, I attended a Women in Business conference. During the networking reception, someone asked about my divorce. "I heard your ex used to work in tech sales," she said. "Did he support your business journey?" I thought about how to answer honestly without being bitter. He supported it in the ways he could. But ultimately, we wanted different things. He needed to be the center of attention. I needed to do meaningful work. Those priorities didn't align. Do you think that's why so many successful women end up divorced? I think successful women end up divorced from insecure men, I clarified. Because insecure men can't handle not being the most accomplished person in the relationship. And secure men? Secure men celebrate their partner's success. They don't feel threatened by it. That conversation crystallized something for me. Ryan wasn't a villain. He was just weak. And weakness, left unchecked, becomes cruelty. I deserved better than someone who needed me to be smaller so he could feel bigger. The blame game continued even after Ryan left town. Mutual friends reported he was telling people in Phoenix that I'd made his life impossible. That I'd sabotaged his relationship with Kelsey. That my success was somehow a personal attack on him. I didn't bother defending myself. Anyone who knew me would see through his stories. Anyone who didn't know me well enough to see the truth wasn't worth convincing. One friend, though, called me directly. "Ben, someone who'd been close to both of us during the marriage. He's saying you humiliated him on purpose," Ben said. "That the whole thing with Kelsey was orchestrated." Did he explain how I supposedly orchestrated her Googling me? No. But he's convinced you planned it somehow. I sighed. "Ben, I ran into them at a party. Ryan introduced his girlfriend as his upgrade. She looked uncomfortable. She later Googled me and discovered he'd been lying about my career. That's it. There was no plan. I believe you. But Ryan needs to believe you plotted against him. Because the alternative, that his own insecurity destroyed his relationship, is too painful to accept. That's not my problem anymore. I know. I just wanted you to know what he's saying." After we hung up, I thought about how exhausting it must be to be Ryan, to constantly maintain a false image, to rewrite every narrative to protect your ego, to blame everyone else when the facade inevitably crumbled. I'd built real success. He'd built a performance. And performances always end. The truth, though, that stays. Ryan's departure didn't end his impact on our social circle. Several friends quietly distanced themselves from him after the Kelsey situation, recognizing a pattern they'd overlooked before. Someone mentioned he'd done similar things in college, dated a woman, then spent years telling people she'd been clingy or needy when really she'd just been successful in her own right. Another friend remembered him constantly talking over a female colleague at his old job, dismissing her ideas until a male coworker repeated them. The pattern was clear once people looked for it. Ryan couldn't handle competent, successful women. He needed to diminish them to feel adequate. I was just the latest and most public example, but I was also the one who'd stopped playing along, who'd let my success speak for itself instead of shrinking to accommodate his insecurity. And that quiet refusal to be diminished had exposed him more effectively than any confrontation could have. Kelsey told me later that she'd heard from another of Ryan's exes. The woman had reached out on social media after seeing posts about the upgrade incident. She said he did the same thing to her, Kelsey reported. Called her unambitious, said she was holding him back. Then she started her own business and he couldn't handle it. What happened? He sabotaged a major contract she was trying to land. Made some calls to clients. Planted doubts about her competence. She only found out later. I felt sick. That's beyond insecurity. That's malicious. She wanted you to know. In case he tries anything similar. But Ryan was gone now, building a new life in a new city with people who didn't know his history. I hoped he'd learn something. But I doubted it. People like Ryan rarely did. Months passed. My business continued growing. I hired 2 more consultants, signed 3 major clients, spoke at another conference. Life moved forward as it always does. Then one afternoon Ryan called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Nina, he said, voice flat. I need to ask you something. Okay. How long did you plan it? The whole thing with Kelsey. When did you decide to humiliate me? I'd expected anger, maybe another apology. Not this paranoid accusation. Ryan, I didn't plan anything. You must have. It was too perfect. She Googles you, finds all this success, realizes I lied. It's like you orchestrated the whole thing. I existed successfully. That's all. You're the one who called me your downgrade at a party. You created this situation. By telling one joke? By spending years lying about my career. To Kelsey, to our friends, to yourself. One Google search exposed all of it. That's not my fault. Silence. Then, quietly, did you enjoy it? Watching me lose her. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Ryan, I barely thought about it. I was busy running my company, living my life. Your relationship drama wasn't on my radar. But it hurt me. Don't you care about that? And there it was, the core of Ryan's worldview. Everything was about him. My success existed to threaten him. My silence was strategic. My mere existence in the same city was an attack. I care that you're hurting, I said honestly. But I'm not responsible for your pain. You did this to yourself. How can you be so cold? I'm not cold. I'm just done taking responsibility for your feelings. You hurt yourself by lying. You lost Kelsey by being dishonest. You're miserable because you built your identity on false narratives. None of that is my fault. This was easier when I could blame you, he admitted. I know. But blaming me won't fix anything. You need to look at yourself. Actually look, not perform looking. He hung up without responding. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. About how desperately Ryan needed me to be the villain in his story. Because if I was the villain, manipulative, vindictive, obsessed with him, then his failures weren't his fault. His insecurity was justified. His lies were defensive, not offensive. But I wasn't the villain. I was just someone who'd built a successful life and refused to hide it to make him comfortable. And that refusal, that quiet insistence on existing fully, that was my real victory. Not the money, not the business, not the public exposure of his lies. My victory was knowing my worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. I'd spent years in a marriage where my success was minimized, my ambitions questioned, my competence doubted, and I'd internalized some of that. Believed some of Ryan's narratives about luck and small thinking, but I'd eventually realized the truth. I was excellent at what I did. I'd built something remarkable. I deserved success. And once I knew that, really knew it, deep in my bones, nothing anyone said could touch it. Not Ryan's lies. Not his upgrade comment. Not his attempts to rewrite history. My worth existed independent of his recognition. That was freedom. That was power. That was the real upgrade. The following week, I was interviewed for a business podcast. The host asked about my journey, and I told the truth about starting from nothing, about building slowly, about staying patient while others chased quick wins. Did you ever doubt yourself? She asked. Constantly at first. I was married to someone who questioned every decision I made, but eventually I learned to trust my own judgment. And once I did, my business exploded. What changed? I stopped seeking external validation. Stopped needing anyone to tell me I was on the right path. I just walked it. A year after the upgrade comment, I attended another engagement party. Different friends, different venue, different crowd. I'd hesitated to go, not wanting another awkward encounter with Ryan. But I'd checked with the hosts, he wasn't invited. He'd moved to Phoenix, fallen out of touch with most of our mutual friends. So I went. And I had a wonderful time. Chatted with old friends, made new connections, celebrated people I cared about. Near the end of the evening, someone I'd just met asked what I did for work. I explained briefly about my consulting firm. Oh wow, she said. I think I read about you. Didn't you speak at that conference in Austin last month? I did. Your framework for sustainable scaling, we're trying to implement that at my company now. It's brilliant. I thanked her, genuinely pleased. We talked shop for a while, exchanging ideas and experiences. As I drove home later, I thought about how different this felt from that party a year ago. How comfortable I was now, talking about my work without downplaying it. How natural it felt to own my success. Ryan had wanted me to feel smaller so he could feel bigger. But I'd learned something crucial. I didn't need to be smaller. I didn't need to apologize for my achievements or hide my confidence. I just needed to be myself. Fully, unapologetically, confidently. Ryan had called Kelsey his upgrade. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He'd never been on my level to begin with. Not because I was better than him as a person, but because I'd done the work, internal and external, to build something real. He'd built an image. I'd built a life. And in the end, only one of those things lasted. I pulled into my driveway, looked at the house I'd bought with money I'd earned, and smiled. This was success. Not the money or the recognition or the satisfaction of proving someone wrong. Just the quiet knowledge that I was enough. Always had been. Always would be. And that was the only upgrade that ever mattered.